We're going to give golden thumbs to our two astrophysicists here. First, I want to tell you that Kip Thorne was the physicist the scientist who helped on this movie, and he recommended he couldn't be with us today, but he highly recommended our guest who came, Miguel Alcubierre. Please come out. And we give you a golden thumb as a guest of the festival.
Thank you very much. This is beautiful. Yeah.
And?
We also have another astrophysicist with us who happens to be a graduate of the University of Illinois and is a very old friend and supporter of the festival, Brant Fortner. And Brant, we have a thumb for you.
Thank you.
And we're also inviting back Scott Mantz and Brian Tellerico.
Hey, everybody. One line struck out, and I want to... Oh, can you do anything else? Oh. Oh, okay.
It's weird being on the other side. There's a lot of you.
That's true.
You're all bright.
One line in the movie really stuck out to me, which was, we're not meant to save the world, we're meant to leave it. And you mentioned something like that out in the lobby before we came in about how that's got to be the future, that's got to be what we plan for. So how realistic is that line? How much does that line ring home for you?
Well, the movie had mixture of strong reality and not strong reality, but the message of the movie is a message that resonated deeply with me, in that, as an ancient Russian physicist said, Earth is our cradle, but you can't live in the cradle forever. And that's true with the human species. At some point, we must leave the Earth. An asteroid is going to hit us, our sun is going to go red giant and engulf us. One way or another, we have to leave the planet. And this movie and 2001, to me, are really the only movies that have expressed that give us that emotion that it's okay. And there was a line in the movie that I'd forgotten that really struck me, and that's that, the universe is a weird, bizarre, unknowable place, but it's not evil. In the same way that we have empathy for the planet is dangerous and does things we don't expect, but the planet isn't inherently evil, and we develop empathy for that. And I think what this movie and 2001 have done is it gives us empathy for the universe, which is our home, or should be our home.
Miguel, you are here to talk about the science, to tell us what is credible here about wormholes, black holes, what we can do and what we can't do.
Yeah, that's true. Well, actually, the film started initially as an idea in the mind of a scientist, Kip Thorne. And eventually the screenplay is very different from what he thought initially, but the idea of having black holes and wormholes and gravitational waves and time dilation and a whole story built around correct science came from him originally. So this is a strange film in that sense. It was initially thought of as a way to represent science. And the premise was that the science in the film had to be done as well as possible. It shouldn't deviate from what we really understand of the universe. And whenever it does speculate, which it does at the very end, is a lot of speculation, it should speculate on things that real scientists do speculate, and not just anything that anybody thought of, but speculations that come guided by science, by string theory, and things like that. So it makes it very special. But now that I saw it, I didn't remember how emotional it is. It's also a very emotional film about love and about hope and about sadness and despair and many other things, which is not in 2001. 2001 is a very intellectual movie. This is far more emotional. But it respects the science in a way that 2001 also did. It's really very well done science. A lot of things in the film, we didn't even know about them until they did it. Like the images of these black holes, they're actually done correctly, calculated on a supercomputer, the way they would look.
You know, when we told people that you were coming here, there were scientists who were actually giddy. They said that you are one of the top relativists in the world. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do in the field of relativity?
Well, yeah, I'm not one of the best-known relativists, but I'm known, so I'm glad they mentioned that. But what I do normally in relativity is I study black holes, and mostly I study black hole collisions. Kip Thorne was the person that actually thought about this idea, and Kip Thorne is my academic grandfather. So he was the supervisor of my supervisor. There's another person around here, Gabriel Allen, who's also a student with me at the same time. And Kip was our grandfather. And we do things that Kip wanted to do initially, like study precisely black holes. And in the field of black holes, we specialize in gravitational waves. Gravitational waves are not in the film, but they were originally in the screenplay. They were erased because it was making the story too long and complex, but they were in the film, in the original idea. And they were actually just detected initially 2 years ago in 2015 for the very first time. But for the last 40 years, a lot of us have been working in predicting the signal of gravitational waves that would come from particularly the collision of two black holes. And that's essentially what I do. I study black holes, black hole interactions, collisions of black holes, and gravitational waves. So that's my field.
Actually,
So, Brant, I have a question for you that's really important, and it actually relates to why we're having a symposium this fall on empathy for the universe. Tell me, what is it about this movie that makes you so emotional, and why did you really want to see it on the screen here?
So first of all, I think Roger was wrong. Roger talked about that movies are an empathy machine, so we can be transported to other humans. And I think we need to extend that to other entities such as the planet, such as the universe. This movie, I really wanted to see this on the big screen and with an audience because it takes real science and mixes that with a deeply emotional resonant story. It bypasses our brain and hits us in the gut in the way that fantasy, such as Star Wars and Star Trek, doesn't, because it's just fantasy and there's this barrier. But it's only by getting close to reality that we create that emotional impact. My gosh, this could be something that we can envision in our future. And it's only by having that emotional impact over and over, we can transcend our day-to-day political battles and what's happening in the world today and realize we have a much larger future that we need to address.
Well, making movies is difficult, but it's not rocket science.
You've been waiting to say that,
I've
right?
waited for the last 3 hours to say that. Thank you for humoring me. But what you do is, and you talk about how the movie was inspired by what's going on in the universe, but in what ways can and is technology advancing, real technology advancing, so what we saw really isn't science fiction, but more approaching science fact?
Yeah, that's correct. What we saw in many things is what we actually understand about the universe. The black holes you see there are realistic black holes. The visualizations of the black holes are solving the correct equations of the theory of relativity to see how a black hole that rotates very fast in this case would look like. The wormhole, that's more speculation. Wormholes, as far as we know, they don't really exist, but the theory allows them. So the visual representation of a wormhole is how it would look like, really, if they actually existed. We don't know if they exist, but if they existed, they would obey these equations and they would look like that. So that's amazing. It's amazing how it was done. And some of these things we didn't know. We didn't really know how a black hole would look like until they calculated these solutions on the supercomputer. We sort of could guess, but nobody had actually done it. Right? So after they did it, they even published scientific papers about this movie. and about the calculations done to represent visually these things.
One of the things that we see in astrophysics, you asked about what is the future, and certain fields reach stagnation and then there's a big leap forward. We now know that we observe less than 5% of the universe. The universe consists of dark matter and dark energy, of which we know almost nothing. And so our knowledge of the universe has been increasing exponentially in just the last decade. And our knowledge of ignorance has also been increasing during that decade. And to my mind, astrophysics and cosmology is on a cusp of great discoveries that will tell us more about the universe in the way that geology did in the 1960s with the discovery of plate tectonics. So this is an incredibly exciting time to be a scientist.
And Brand, a question I have for you, the University of Illinois has one of the best national supercomputing institutions here. What did you think, and Donna Cox, I don't know if she's in the audience
where's Donna?
Today. Donna Cox is, oh, there she is. She is a rock star. She is a genius with taking big data and translating it into a visual, beautiful visual form and helping to tell stories with it. How do you think this is not something that was done from us, but how did this look compared to what Donna Cox is doing at the university?
So I did not ask Chaz to ask this question. I'm a graduate at the University of Illinois. I think it's the greatest university in the universe. And I can give you two reasons up here why that's so. First of all, Miguel here is a world expert in numerical relativity, using computers to simulate black hole collisions, as we've seen with the detection of gravity waves in 2015 and the most recent one a few months ago. That field was created here at the University of Illinois. Okay, so you are essentially the offspring of this university, academically. The other thing is you saw incredible visualizations that were published in research papers, visualizations that were done by a gentleman I just met today, AJ, who is over there somewhere, okay? Those visualizations were not done at the University of Illinois. However, AJ worked with Donna Cox. So just like Miguel is the offspring of NCSA and numerical relativity, AJ is an offspring of Donna Cox, who is University of Illinois incarnate. So what you're seeing up here is the University of Illinois.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I would just like to add something, that numerical relativity gave rise to the NCSA. The NCSA, the first national supercomputing center in America, was created because of numerical relativity, because of black holes, actually, because Larry Smarr was doing calculations in the 70s about black hole interactions, and he had to travel every few months to Germany because there were no supercomputers in America that he could use. He had to do that in Europe. So after a few years, he thought, this is ridiculous. We need a supercomputing center in the United States. So we went to the National Science Foundation and asked for about, I don't know, but about $50 million in the 70s, late 70s or early 80s. And he said, we need this money to create a supercomputing center in America. And he convinced them, they gave him the money, and that's the origin of NCSA.
I'm curious about sci-fi movies like this one as sort of endorsements for the field, as sort of advertisements for science and exploration and space and those kinds of things. I remember when I saw The Martian, I wrote about how it was a movie in which intelligence and science saved someone's life, and how a kid seeing that might actually get interested in science and NASA and exploration. This film certainly does that. What are some other films that you feel are like good endorsements, not just accurate, but could get people excited about science through entertainment?
Come on, Star Trek is pretty good.
It's interesting looking at Star Wars and Star Trek. Star Wars is about how you want to have all of your guns so you can shoot all of the bad guys. Star Trek is about a universe where we're all working together for the common good. There's almost a political aspect to those. I think you're right. Star Trek certainly helps us develop an emotional feeling for the future. The break that it has for me and anybody that's scientifically literate is they do painting of scientific accuracy, but it's just a painting. If you mention the movie The Martian, this movie, and 2001, they're really the only large-scale motion pictures that, to me, are close enough to accuracy to really develop that emotional impact among people that are scientifically literate.
So what does Gravity get wrong?
Yeah, so Neil deGrasse Tyson had his comments about gravity.
Yeah, I think in this movie they show us science as it really is. I mean, black holes do exist. They're out there. We haven't been able to get close to one, but they're really there. They show us also space travel apart from the wormhole, which is completely different. It takes you to another galaxy in seconds. But the traveling to Saturn is how we would really do it. It would take us years to get there. They show us the spaceships as they really are. They show us they don't have, in Star Trek and Star Wars, they walk around the spaceships like nothing because they have artificial gravity, whatever that is. But here they don't. They walk on the spaceship because it rotates. I mean, just like in 2001, and that's centrifugal force, which we do understand. So they try to keep the science really tight. And I think that's important also because it will show young people that science is like that. This is real science, and eventually we will go to Saturn. I'm pretty sure of that. I don't know about another galaxy, but we'll reach Saturn, and we'll probably reach it in a spaceship that does things similar to the one we saw here. And we will go to Mars, and we will build colonies in Mars, and it will look like the colonies they had here. So many of the things they show are realistic in that sense, and we have a shot at doing them. Maybe not in my lifetime, but in the next century, probably. I mean, if we don't do it in 100 years, I'll probably be disappointed because it doesn't seem that far-fetched, and that's really done correctly. So I think that has the potential of inspiring people to really pursue those things in the future.
I have a question for Brian and Scott. I think that the choice of Matthew McConaughey for the role in this movie was great casting. Tell us, what about his performance you think made it so? Either one of you.
Well, actually, I do think that Matthew McConaughey, first of all, it was his first major role after he won an Oscar for Dallas Buyers Club, so his timing was absolutely perfect, especially to work with a filmmaker like Nolan, who is so, Christopher Nolan, I've always said, what I love about his movies is that he doesn't dumb down his films. He challenges the audience to rise to his level of intelligence while also making films that are absolutely entertaining. And this is certainly one of his movies that qualifies. As far as McConaughey goes, there's an everyman aspect to him. He's not a superhero. He's a dad. He's flawed. He's filled with vulnerability and doubt. And, you know, he's got this like Midwestern feel that people between New York and LA can absolutely relate to. I thought he crushed it.
You buy him as a farmer as much as anything else, and that's essential to the first act of the film, to set him up as a farmer and a father, and that's Nolan's influence as well. McConaughey's always been very in touch with his emotions, especially in this film, like arguably here more than anywhere. I think it's maybe his best performance, to be honest, because of the way he taps into fatherhood and parenthood and emotion while never losing the intellectual aspect of it. It could have been a very dry performance. It could have been a very clinical, cold sci-fi piece, but he's the heart of it, really. And Chastain's always great.
Well, the thing about this movie is just how, like you both noted, it treats science with such respect, but it is a deeply emotional film. I mean, I hadn't seen the movie in the 4 years since it came out in, I think it was October or November of 2014. Yeah. And, you know, it was almost 4 years ago. And just watching it on the big screen right now for the first time since then, I was really blown away by just the number of levels that this movie really does work on, especially emotionally.
I have a question for you two. Oh, did you want to
Well,
speak
just
to
a
his
brief comment. I think
performance?
making a movie that's scientifically accurate and has that kind of emotional impact, it consists of details, and it's rocket science.
Well, one of the things that I noticed this the first time, but today, maybe because this is in the era of Me Too and Time's Up, but I really noticed how important it was to have that little girl, Murphy, as the sort of the character that we're focused on for film. This question is actually for you two.
Oh.
It's who because you're teaching astrophysics. Tell me, how many female students are there, and what do you see in your research and things, science and girls, women in science? Do you see an increase, or what's happening now?
I can speak for physics because I just looked at those statistics last week.
Okay.
10 years ago, 7% of the graduates in physics were women, and now it's 20%.
Wait, say that again?
We started out 10 years ago at 7%.
Oh, seven. I thought you
Seven.
said 70.
Oh, no, sorry. And now it's at 20%. And in the course I teach, right now I'm teaching intro astronomy, and it's the women that get excited about that. And we would like that 20% to be higher, but it is increasing.
I see something similar, but it's very slow. In the lectures I give, it's about 20% female students and the rest are male, which is a bit better from the past. In the institute where I'm director of an institute in Mexico. Only about 12% of the researchers are female, and the other almost 80% are male. It's particularly bad in physics. In astronomy, it's a bit better. In astronomy, it's probably approaching 30% or more females. I don't really know why, but it seems to be more attractive astronomy than pure physics. It's increasing more slowly than I would like, but it's increasing. And these role models of girls doing science, of females doing science, I think they're extremely important.
I think in terms of Murphy, the young girl, you know, the vulnerability, the innocence that she represents, like even Michael Caine's character when he says it's her generation that really is going to suffer, really hits home for everybody watching, especially parents who have kids that age. And I think that's a way that it really draws a lot of moviegoers in, was to make her really what's at stake.
You know, something you said on the panel this morning, Brian, really hit home with me when we were talking about, it was the panel on the future of film criticism and the small number of women film critics there are, and the small number of women with major roles that you see in movies. You said it's just as important for your boys, you have 3 boys, to see women in these roles as it is for girls to see. Can you expound upon that?
I'll say what I said this morning, which is that my 8-year-old boy's 2 favorite movies are Wonder Woman and Black Panther. I think that makes a difference. I think boys growing up and seeing people of color and females in roles like that, and Rey and Finn in the Star Wars universe shouldn't be discounted either. Like, these are major changes in the way boys perceive the world around them. My boys don't really understand why women or minorities should be treated any differently, and that's part of the way I raise them. But to have a culture that reflects that is incredibly important, because I can't be there all the time. I'm not going to watch every movie with them. So for things like Interstellar and Black Panther and Wonder Woman and Star Wars to reflect a more diverse society, I think makes for a better future, as cheesy as that sounds. I do think that.
Yeah, I think, again, just watching a film like Interstellar, especially with you guys giving it the seal of approval, giving your background. I mean it, because it really was a film that it doesn't get mired in, like, the word I use is technobabble. It explains, it's relatable, it's completely, for lack of a better term, grounded in reality in a way that the only other film I could think of was 50 years ago, which was 2001: A Space Odyssey. But the heart of the film is why we're all here. You know, if we wanted to see a movie about rocket science, we'd watch a documentary. You know, but this is a film that is a cautionary tale in a lot of ways, because of the way we've been treating the planet and the way that the planet is sort of, you know, reacting to that. You agree?
I do, but I need to, you mentioned 2001,
Yeah.
and since I'm a advocate for the University of Illinois, I should mention that Hal,
Hal,
the computer, yes,
Urbana, Illinois.
he was born here in 1997, and we had a birthday party for him. Anybody here remember that, 1997? Yeah.
Did you see Daisy?
Don't remember.
I don't remember whether we sang Daisy, but I don't think so at Cyberfest. But now I forgot. I was actually going to open it to the audience. We have the microphones out there, and we would like to open it for questions from the audience.
To your right.
How do you all view another McConaughey movie, Contact?
Oh, I think that's a very nice question. That movie is really beautiful. I love that movie. It also has a connection with this one. Maybe you don't know, but Carl Sagan and Kip Thorne were good friends. And when Carl Sagan was writing the novel Contact in the early 80s, he wrote to Kip and he asked him how his characters could travel from one star to another far away. And initially Carl wanted to use black holes. And Kip told him black holes are a bad idea because once you go into a black hole, you can't come out and you just die. So maybe use wormholes, which at that time they existed as theoretical ideas in physics, but very few people had heard about the concept. And it became very popular after that movie. And actually Kip Thorne did research in wormholes, real research in physics, after the talking with Carl Sagan, and then came out the movie. So I think it's a very closely related film. It's not as ambitious in the sense that it doesn't show you all these images. The wormhole in that film is not really done accurately. Now it is. So I get the feeling that Kip probably, after Contact, had this lingering idea that he wanted to do something like that, but better. and maybe Interstellar is the result.
Question?
We have a question right over here.
It's Donna. I'm going to ask a question. So in terms, there's a critical point in the movie where behind the bookcase matrix, when he's trying to connect with Chastain and McConaughey, and I would like to ask how much of that, there's a lot of assumptions in doing the calculations and relativity and all of that. But you get to this critical point in the movie, and that is the connection back in time between the father, the daughter, the ghost, which was a metaphor for his appearance. So how realistic, astrophysically speaking, is that moment?
Okay, that's the least realistic part of the film. It's very, very speculative. The first time I saw the movie, I missed most of it because you're just trying to understand the drama and the human situation, and you miss most of it. But the speculation there, it is based on science, but tangentially if you want. It's based on string theory. String theory assumes that there's more dimensions in our universe than the 3 dimensions we normally see. They usually think about in terms of 10 dimensions. But in the film, they water that down to just 4 dimensions of space, the 3 dimensions we see and another one. And the whole idea of the last sequence is that they're in a sort of a very complex, like sort of spaceship created by these ultra-advanced beings in 5 dimensions. So what they're saying is called a tesseract, which is a 5-dimensional cube. And he's sitting in one of the sides of this 5-dimensional cube, and he can see all of 3 dimensions in our space in the on different sides. So if he looks one way, he's from the top, and if he looks another way, he looks from the bottom. So he's sort of looking all 3-dimensional space in this room from many different perspectives. But he also looks at time. I mean, apparently where he is, time, you can move around time linearly, like you can move here back and forth, you can actually look at time one way and the other. But he cannot interact with them except via gravity. This is another speculation that comes from string theory in the sense that gravity can go through all dimensions, even possibly time. So you could probably use gravity to communicate back in time. But that's the most speculative idea of them all, because even in string theory, normally you cannot travel back in time. You cannot communicate to the past in any other way. But here they needed that for the movie, so they assumed that maybe gravity can do it, but nothing else. But this is the heaviest speculation in the movie. But as I said, Kip wanted this to, at least if you have speculation, it should come from science. So these are things that real physicists speculate when they do string theory. There's more dimensions, and maybe when you're in this many more dimensions, you can travel through these extra dimensions easier. So in this case, they move all the way from this big black hole in another galaxy to Earth, to the room where Murphy lives, and they do that in seconds. So maybe when you're moving in the 5th dimension, you can travel faster, much faster than light. They talk about it a little bit in the movie. They mention words, and you can hardly listen to them, but they say this being live in the bulk. And when you talk about string theory, they said that the bulk It's all these extra dimensions. And we live on just one surface, which they call the brain, which is short for membrane. We live in a small three-dimensional membrane of a big bulk space-time that has many dimensions. They do mention the word a couple of times, the bulk, but they never explain it.
So Donna, let me just mention one thing that certainly that sequence was off in the woo-woo sphere. However, we were expressing what he said shorter, but the thing I appreciate about the sequence is that sequence was partially written by a Nobel Prize-winning astrophysicist. And so, yes, it was extremely speculative, but at least we were in the hands of the master.
And the master stroke at that point really is that it's also deeply metaphorical. I mean, who wouldn't, in times of darkness and grief and despair, when the world is falling apart, who hasn't wanted someone they've lost and been apart from for so long to come back and give them the answer? So it's a film that works in two different ways.
I think what you said is also important to remind people. Kip Thorne won the Nobel Prize a few months ago at the end of 2017. He didn't win it for the film. The film was already done. But he won it for the detection of gravitational waves. And if you haven't heard about that, you should really go back and look at it, because it's one of the most amazing discoveries of this century, of the 21st century. We've been expecting to find them for 100 years, and we finally found them thanks to Kip and other people who tried to find them since the 80s. And finally we did, and he got the Nobel Prize. And you probably haven't noticed my tie, but my tie is the gravitational wave tie. This is the signal of gravitational waves detected in 2015, which is all over the pattern of the tie, which is something really exciting. So yes, it's true. This is a Nobel Prize winner that actually helped on this movie.
Oh, I know. I had a question about the question I wanted to ask. Where does the equation come from that 1 hour equals 7 years, and wherever?
Okay.
Is there any scientific basis
Yeah.
to that?
There is a scientific basis. In relativity, as they mention in the film, time can travel slower depending how you move. So for example, if you're moving very close to the speed of light, then time goes slower.
There's no answer. It's the way our universe is constructed. And the advancement of science in the last 100 years has been discovering that the universe is built in a very non-obvious way. And this was Einstein's incredible genius to say time and space are variable, not fixed.
Exactly.
And it
That's
doesn't
where
make any sense, but that's the way our universe is built.
That's where the word space-time comes from, because time and space are related. You cannot separate them. And in the case of a black hole, time also gets warped. You have a curvature of time, a warping of time. And that means that time goes slower close to the black hole than far away. It actually goes slower even here. And we don't notice it because it's very, very tiny effect. But on the Earth, time goes slow by 1 second every 30 years compared to space. And we know that because we measure it, and you actually measure it even if you don't know it every time you use your GPS on your cell phone. Because the GPS satellites are up there in space, and time goes a little bit faster for them. 1 part in 10 to the 9, 1 part in 1,000 in a billion. And it's a very small effect, but it's enough to make the GPS not work if you don't take it into account. But then in a black hole, the effect is huge. It can be infinite. This is one of the problems that Kip actually had with the producers of the film, with the director, with Christopher Nolan, because Christopher wanted this huge effect of 1 hour equals 7 years, and that effect is about 100,000, 1 part in it's 100,000 slower time, and this is very difficult to get even in a black hole. So Kip actually fought with the equations until he found a way in which you had a very big black hole that rotates extremely fast, and you're very close to the black hole. Then you can have a factor that big. Initially, he told Chris Nolan, no, you can't have it that big. You can have 1 year equals 10 years or something like that. 1 hour equals 10 years, that's too much. But then he found a way, and that's what they depicted in the movie.
So I think we have time for one more question. Question?
To your right.
Hi, my name is Jordy. This is a question mainly for Miguel and Brand. It's another technical question in the weeds, but they do acceleration really well in this movie. Like normally in space movies, you have, if you want to go, if you want to go really fast, you just punch the throttle up to 100% and leave it there, right? They don't take into account that in microgravity, you don't need to keep the engines on. But in the scene when they are in the wormhole or when they are in the black hole, and you see all of these forces acting on the ship, right? It's shaking back and forth. There's pieces ripping off. That seems like something that you'd have if there's air or if there's something that you're flying through, but you're in space. So is that accurate, or is that kind of assumption?
Well, okay,
Good
so
question.
parts of the movie were extremely accurate. Parts of it went off into woo-woo land. That was, what you're seeing is the transition. And what you're seeing with pieces falling off, those are the tidal effects
Exactly.
of the black hole. The force that you feel to the left of the ship is different than the force you feel to the right of the ship. And that will tend to pull things apart. The physicists use a technical term, getting close to a black hole, of spaghettification, okay? You are stretched like that, and that's what you were seeing.
Okay, thank you so much.